In the last couple of months I've made a solid foundation for my game. I've worked out the basic game design ideas and now we actually have to start doing all the work. So that's what I've been doing, working on the first vertical slice of the game. Meaning I need to create a tutorial boss and a level to go around it. And because level design for a tutorial scares me, let's focus on the boss for now. Some hours of modeling, unwrapping and rigging later, I figured I didn't feel like animating it just yet. So instead I played around with some textures. So far the main enemies have just been pure black, and so has this boss. I had a rough idea of what I wanted them to look like then. I made the models pretty, for lack of a better term, veiny? And those veins would have textures with almost a web-like texture that then contrasts nicely against their black body. Of course, the body being full black is still a little bit bland, so mixing some noise textures gives it a little bit more detail, and that helped quite a bit. I exported these veins and the main body texture as two separate texture files. That way I can use the veins as an emission map and control their brightness throughout the animations. That way it will light up when it attacks. The animation itself telegraphs the attack more than well enough at this point, but well, more communication to the player never hurts, and honestly it just looks pretty damn cool. Maybe at some point I'll try using different colors of light for all the different attacks that the boss fight has, so if nothing else, all this procrastination actually gave me a good idea. Hell, I'm even writing this script before I get started on the animations. And after the animations were done, well, honestly, they went decently well, all things considered. The rig itself was a little weird to work with. I really need to improve my rigging skills at some point, but I made a simple idle animation. Nothing fancy, but it'll work. Besides, these are easy enough to replace later on. Then came the first attack. This is based on the attack Darkseid does in Kingdom Hearts, and I didn't know how I wanted to do this. At first I just made one huge animation that was about 300 frames long, punching the ground, hanging around a little, punch towards the hand that's stuck with the free hand, attacking the player that would be in that general area, and then stand up. But I quickly realized that this would be a little too predictable. So instead I opted to split this huge animation into 4 distinct parts. The initial strike, a idle loop where the player can go to town and deal a lot of damage, the attack with its free hand. This way it can do the attack more than once, and with a slightly less predictable pattern, and then one where it stands up and goes back to its normal idle animation. The second attack was way easier to animate, just having to reach up into the sky, and then all the fancy stuff for this will be done in engine. But for the third attack, I initially wanted to have an attack animation that aims using inverse kinematics in engine, but considering how janky this rig is, as it is, I decided not to tempt fate and just make a normal animation for it. The boss will just generate a projectile in front of him and then launch it towards the player. Once I imported the first few animations into the engine though, I realized that I probably should give the player a couple more options to attack the boss. So I added some platforms that you can walk up to that are about on level with his hands. Then also made some quick animations of him sweeping his hands left or right. Now, this already complicates things because now I have to keep track of where the player is so the boss can attack in a way that makes sense. We don't want him hitting to the right when the player is to the left of him after all. So, you know what time it is. It's coding time. Really, the first part, making the actual attacks, wasn't too hard. Most of it relies on the animations after all. The attack where he fires a projectile and the one where meteors rain down from the sky were the ones that needed some more work. But both of those things will be code required for future boss fights too, so I'm happy to write that now. Honestly, I think I spent a longer time making the visual effects for these than the actual code. That being said, now we get to the actual AI part, because as it stands, I can only manually trigger all these attacks through the animator. Which, of course, doesn't work super well for an actual game, so let's hope that this goes well. The first thing I need to know, as I mentioned before, is where the player is. On the ground, on the left side, or on the right side. This is simply done through some trigger boxes that update a variable in the enemy when the player enters them. This way I can prevent any attacks that won't hit the player anyway from being used. But then, how do I program the rest? My first idea was to make a timer with a minimum and a maximum time between attacks. Then when the timer runs out, pick one of the attacks at random based on the last known position of the player. Then for when the boss is stuck in the ground, a similar subsystem where it counts down a timer that has a certain chance of either remaining idle, doing an attack, or standing up. And that should be a functioning boss fight AI. And to my surprise, after I coded all of this, it worked. I've got a boss fight that's functioning now. I can't help but feel that this is a slightly hacky way to do it, and I may be missing some much better way to do this. So, I'm curious to read your comments on this video, but for now, that's my first boss fight, and I guess now I have to build the dungeon that goes around him, eh? Well, that's something for next time, I suppose. And a very big thank you to all of my Patreons. You can see them on screen right now. If you want to help out supporting the channel, there's a link down below in the description to the Patreon page.